Call the October 5th public portion of the governing board meeting to order at 5:30, being held here at Jerry Rovey District Facility. This is the 4-day committee review for the public to take a look at things and to comment and ask any questions if they'd like. Governing board members present are Brian Parks, Paul Bixler, Paul Jensen, and myself, Mark Aguirre. Mr. Todd is absent. Mr. Parks, if you could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Schuff, and she'll kind of give some explanations on how we're going to run the virtual portion of this meeting. So, Dr. Schuff.
Thank you, President Aguirre, members of the governing board. I want to thank all of our parents for joining us here this evening. This is a virtual public hearing, and this is going to give you the opportunity to share your comments and discussion. I'll share some information. Kind of the process we'll use is I'll share a section of information and then give you some opportunity to respond to that. How we'll do that is during the time that I'm sharing the information from the slides, you'll be able to see that information. The microphones will be muted during that time, and then we'll open them up after that. So I'll explain that process of the meeting after I'm able to share a little bit of information. So if you'll bring the slides up, please. Okay. All right. So this work on the 4-day study, 4-day week study, came about last year when we were in budget study sessions. And one of the ideas that came up was, could the district save money with a 4-day school schedule? It was discussed at that time. There was some interest from the committee and the people that we talked to in the stakeholder group meetings. And in the spring, the district followed up with a short survey of both our staff and our parents. And in that, there was some favorable response to that survey, and it was still favorable even if the district didn't save any money. So that was just enough information that we felt like we needed to study this a little bit further. We put together a committee that started their work in July. So this is a pretty long list of some of the people who were involved. And then the list continues on. You'll see at least one JUST community member, many parents, and many staff members, including both certified and support staff. Over time, we met 4 different times. These are the topics that were studied. And we're really going to follow kind of that same pattern with the information we'll share with you tonight. The committee, each of the meetings, we added on to this guiding principle list. We tried to say, if we made a good decision, we made a good recommendation, if we designed a model in some way that potentially could be viable, what would be the guiding principles to guide that work? And so the ones that you see in white are the ones that the committee agreed to, and we had discussions over, but administration also recognized that once the committee work was finished, and we were continuing to do work in preparation for these public hearings and eventually governing board meetings for a decision, that we would also need to, in making a good decision, consider the survey data that's from parents and staff. And that survey, both those surveys are still open, and we highly, highly encourage everyone to participate in that survey, and so that we really are listening to all of our stakeholders in the district. The last thing that's added is certainly we will have to consider the survey information. We can share with some information regarding people's likelihood to continue enrollment or potentially discontinue enrollment in the district with the potential implementation of a 4-day week. So just we'll come back to these, and I think the governing board will consider these going forward. So the very first thing the committee looked at was what can we know, what can we learn from others about the educational impact of a 4-day week. The Liberty School District exists for one clear purpose, and that is for the education of our children. That is our mission. So that was probably the most important thing to consider, and the committee looked at that first. In the documents that you could access on the district website is a link to a document that has links out to other articles, abstracts of those research articles, and it's primarily a list of research articles, not necessarily journal articles where people are discussing it. Really is what were the actual impacts or findings implemented. So we encourage you to look at those things. I will tell you that generalizing, you hesitate to generalize too much, but generalizing, I would say that to the extent that a school district maintained the number of instructional hours it had in a 5-day week, they were able to minimize any negative impact to instruction or student learning. That's not true across the board. There were some that had negative impacts. There were some that had positive impacts. Neither were really strongly negative or strongly positive. It really, I would say, centered around truly the impact of the number of instructional hours. That led the committee to look at models that had a greater number of instructional hours, trying to approximate as close as possible to what the district currently has in a 5-day week. Mrs. Camp led some conversations around curriculum and assessment and what would be the impact of that. Overall, she and her team and teachers realized that it would be a shorter week, longer days, but overall it's a proportionate amount of time for a proportionate amount of the curriculum, especially if the instructional hours were relatively equal. There was consideration for what happens to the CHAMPs, or our special area teachers. That's art, music, and PE. As you are likely aware, the district did not pass the override this past year. That has resulted in us a cut to the instructional minutes for our special area classes. And so going forward, it really isn't a matter of the 4-day week decision. It's really more a matter of what is the outcome of the upcoming election, whether or not special area classes could be restored in the amount of minutes or even increase in the amount of minutes is really all to do with the outcome of the election. We could even be facing possible reduction or elimination of these special area classes based on the election outcome. Assessment, same as curriculum, really found that we could still maintain our assessment schedule cycle within the 4 days because there's longer days, even though it's a shorter week. Special education, again, really about proportion, and so it is overall the instructional minutes that are written into the IEPs still able to accomplish those outcomes with the minutes. Some consideration for students that still would be on a 5-day schedule that are educated in other institutions or organizations. Instructional time was a hefty part of the discussion, and I would start by saying that our district currently offers 1,134 hours of instruction per school year, and that's 7 hours per day, 5 days a week, and you can see on the right the total number of full days, 37 early release days, and parent-teacher conference days, which are also early release days. Within that, students don't attend, but we also have 2 full days of professional development days where students don't attend school. So 1,134 hours is really what you would want to hold in your head to say how close could we get to that with our 4-day week schedule. So we looked at 147 days, looked at a 7.5-hour school day, adding 30 minutes to the school day. That brings it to 1,102 hours, which is a difference of 32 hours less in a 5-day schedule. So you can see now, once you see what that difference is, you can start to play with the number of days, how long the actual school day is, and it is possible to approximate it all the way down to 0 if that is the desired outcome. So just a few more examples here, depending on how many early release days. This one has a 37-hour difference. And also I would point out that in a 5-day schedule, on a daily basis, 1 hour of the time children are in school is not really eligible to be able to be useful for instruction. So if 40 minutes a day is lunch and recess, 5 minutes for morning announcements and taking attendance, and approximately 15 minutes for recess, you're really looking at about an hour per day that's non-instructional time, but it is still school time. And also on the Fridays, if you're giving up Fridays as a 1 day per week, then that's 1 hour per week times 36 weeks in the school year, which gets you to about 36 hours you gain back. So you notice in the examples that I just gave, they were, one of them was, I think, 35 hours. Well, these hours on Friday wouldn't have been useful anyway, so you could say you're getting pretty close to the number of instructional hours with that model. If you want to be very specific and say the amount of time they're in school, then we can look at a few other examples, schedules that the committee didn't look at. So this one looks at a 148-day model, still 7.5 hours. You're looking at 30 hours less. And then you can see you can get a little bit closer with 148 days. And now you've got a difference of 5 hours. If you were to eliminate 2 early release days and have them all be full days, you really start to zero out the difference. So there are some options that if this was implemented, the governing board could decide what the difference was. The primary consideration, in addition to the educational impact and the instructional hours, the committee was also very concerned about essentially the students and the teachers' stamina in the day. So they were concerned when, much over 7.5 hours, and they were concerned at the 8-hour mark. So I'd say less than 8 hours would meet in with what that group of people thought could be successful. Then you put the number of days out there. This particular calendar models 148 days. That leaves equal split between fall and spring, even though we're a trimester district. It also accounts for the Monday holidays, because we have state and federal holidays, and that takes 3 times in the year where there would be a 3-day school week, essentially offering a 4-day weekend for staff and families to plan around. Overall, the calendar comes very close. This one is within 1 day difference of the start and finish school days of Buckeye Union High School District. So again, this is one way to model it, and I'll talk about professional development impact in a little bit. So on the screen, you can see the pros and cons that the committee came up with, trying to just demonstrate that there's just pluses and minuses to the model, and these are the big ideas that came out of academic learning and social skills, or behaviors also. So I'll give you a moment to skim read through those. And I think I've already talked through most of the big ideas. All right, so I'm going to stop for a moment and just hear from any of you that would like to speak. Just know that we've got several categories coming up, so the conversation right now, if we could focus on what would be the impact on student learning, so related to those instructional hours, those types of things, we'll have an opportunity to talk about other things like budget and childcare and impact to staff in later parts. So if the team, if you would open up the chat, and in the chat, if you will type in your name to the chat, just your name only. And as part of the public meeting, we won't be referring or reading the other chat, any other chat information. So if you'll just limit that to typing in your name, and then that will let us know who to call on, and they will unmute, or you can tell you what. I think everybody's muted, and when it's your turn to talk, if you will just unmute yourself by using the tab at the bottom. Thank you, Luke, for the test. I'll leave that to the governing board, since it's virtual and it's here.
I just wanted to give a minute to see if anyone. Yep. Please.
Go for it.
All right, thank you for taking this time. I know the administration has put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate the hard work that they put into this. Talking about, real quick, the student, focusing on what the student is gonna get out of this. That would help. All right, I'm going to repeat for those online. The administration has put a lot of time and effort into this study, and I appreciate them for everything that they've put into this. Along with all the parents and staff that have showed up at the meetings, it's been very productive, I would say. Discussing just this topic about the student learning, there's a couple different elements, and I'm sure Dr. Schuff can speak more clearly to these, but looking at these longer days, shorter week but longer days in the classroom, speaking with some of the teachers, we've having them being able to, I don't want to jump forward because there's a lot to this whole study, right? But the teachers have more time to be prepared, which makes better instruction, which children also being longer in the classroom, there's give and takes to this, right? A lot of people think that, well, how long could a kid keep their focus? And so, but also with less distractions. Some of these classes, it seems like as soon as you get into the class, you're already leaving the class, right? Because period's up already. So there's a lot of give and take, but from what we've seen, the discussions I've had, there's been a lot of, this wouldn't necessarily impact it positive or negative from what we've seen, but we do caution making it an 8-hour day. That's going to drive staff into the ground. They're already way overworked. That's going to really detriment the mindset of these kids, right? They can't stay focused on a topic for that long. So that's all I'm going to say on this, and hopefully there's somebody else who wants to speak.
So, Mrs. Molina, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I had a question on the pros. It said that there was a neutral impact on academic instruction, but then the con said there was going to be a decrease in the instruction. So does that mean there isn't a neutral impact? Like it's going to impact instruction overall, right? They're going to get less instruction.
Thank you for the question. We can't say that we know exactly what would happen. We just know from the literature that if we can make the instructional hours as close to as possible, that the amount of time and access children have to learning, that has a positive impact on learning. So, there is no clear-cut answer on that. Talking with other school districts, and what did they see with academic increase or decrease? I think some showed, local districts, at least here in Arizona, Maricopa County, shared that there really wasn't an increase or decrease. And then 2 of them did show a decline in student academics, but they didn't necessarily point to 4-day week as being the deciding factor because they also were implementing it during the time of the pandemic. So that definitely confused the issue of being able to really clearly discern that.
Okay, thanks for explaining. Yeah, that was my concern, that just trying to see the big picture on how much of a decline and impact it would have on their academics.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other names in the chat, Dr. Schuff.
Sure. All right, we next looked at professional development. As an organization, we have read and thoroughly understand that the impact of an effective teacher on student learning is probably the most important and significant factor in that, according to educational research. And so when we thought about what is our opportunity as an organization to really make sure that we have highly effective teachers, and our opportunity is through professional development. In our school district, professional development has a broad term, but it does not mean just workshops and training. It also is inclusive of that collaborative time where teachers are focused on thinking about how are they planning effectively for their students and working together to get those best outcomes. How are they using student achievement data? How are they designing assessments that can determine how well children are learning that day, that week, that unit? So all of that goes into the time that we would consider important for professional development and for their ongoing professional learning. So how to approach that, we looked at, first of all, what does the day look like for a teacher now on a 7 hour, 5 days a week? And really all that's left over for teachers right now, if we take away the 7 hours per day and then about 45 minutes between before and after school time where they're expected to be there and be available for meetings or supervisory duties before and after school. You take that 7 3/4 of an hour each day, it really leaves teachers with 1 hour and 15 minutes that they could flexibly decide what they were going to work on within a 40-hour week. So we hear often that our teachers work far more than a 40-hour week. So now they're working into their time to accomplish those tasks and be fully prepared and ready for instructing our children. Arizona and the United States have work schedules for teachers that have time that's structured for them in front of kids far more than other other countries. So Finland, for example, has far less time during the school day, but which allows more time for professional development planning, preparation for the teachers, and yet they have outcomes, educational outcomes that are far better than the United States. So that's just an example of looking at where is that flexible time, and if we accomplish that with a 4-day week, then that provides much more flexible opportunity of time that could be used for their flexible time, but could also what's available and eligible for professional learning. So you could see, if we're looking at the 7.5-hour day, 4 days a week, there's about 14 hours for every 2 weeks available that could be used within the 40-hour week towards professional learning. Recognizing that we don't want to take all of that time for professional learning. We think it's important that the teachers have more teacher-directed time. So we essentially modeled this calendar where the red days, if you will, would be district site professional time. And some of that is also teacher-directed, not necessarily structured by the principal of the district. It could be teacher-directed as well. But fully flexible teacher-directed time where they make complete choice of what they're doing and when they're doing it would be 18 Fridays of the year, and the other would be 16 Fridays of the year. So overall, these were the big ideas for pros and cons for certified staff. I'd say that the two biggest takeaways that that I internalized from our conversations with teachers was one, if we're providing greater flexibility for them, that really contributes to that overall mental health for them, and being overworked, that work-life balance was a very important piece. And also the concept that if we're able to offer something to our teachers that does provide a greater work-life balance when a time when we aren't able to give them compensation in the same way, this is offering something, and it contributes to our ability to recruit and retain our teachers. And if we can do that more readily, and we can actually recruit higher quality teachers, we have a great number of emergency certified teachers right now that don't have the same level of training and experience. If we can recruit those people, that potentially could have an impact on improved student learning. So those were some big ideas. There was some concern that it was less professional development time than what we currently have, but I think there were also those there that thought while it was about 12 hours less per year, it still, again, was approximating closely what we have to offer right now, but giving them fresher time versus getting professional learning at the end of a school day after they've already been teaching. So those are the big ideas for certified staff, but autonomy, flexibility were big aspects. So I'll open it back up again. If you would list your name in the chat if you have a comment or a question related to some impacts on certified staff.
Mr. Sueller? Mr. Standridge?
Hi, good evening. It's actually Ms. Standridge. The slide before, I guess it was number 24, and it had the 5 days listed as 7.5. Wednesdays are early release days. So would that number be accurate? It's the slide before this one.
So in the 4-day week model, we took out early releases. You saw in some of the slides with instruction hours, there was consideration for no early releases at all, and then some maintaining either 2 or 4 per year for just parent-teacher conferences. So it's kind of a trade-off. Another school district, Cartwright, they found that their parents actually preferred the 4-day week and having a whole day off as opposed to having to come pick up and drop off kids for an early release schedule. And I think that would just depend on what that impact is for our parents to see if they would have the same thought. But there would be really very minimal early releases. You would really see a Monday through Thursday straight schedule every week of the year, with the exception of potentially with the exception of parent-teacher conferences or the 3 weeks when there was a Monday holiday.
And I just have one other question. It's extremely obvious that you're very pro the 4-day, just in terms of the parents who have to withdraw their kids. There won't be any issues with us enrolling them in another school in the district because of this decision that you guys are going to make going to 4 days,
Yeah.
correct?
There's two parts to that. One, I'm not extremely pro, but I will say these first initial slides and this first initial information really showed less cons. I think you're going to see some things coming up where it's swayed to the other side. There's really, some more negative things associated with it. So I hope that by the end you would feel like we took an unbiased approach on this. The question to your point about families who said this isn't for me, if the district went forward with this and families made a decision to withdraw their children and take them someplace else, that is absolutely an opportunity or right for parents. And we hope that we will choose a solution that most people do want.
Well, and I just based it on the 2 slides which showed the pros and cons. The
Sure.
first slide was kind of blurry and none of the cons were mentioned, and then the second slide with the pros and cons it's kind of, you explain the cons in a positive way in terms of really they want a con. It wasn't stated as any negativity so far, so I'll just wait to see what else comes of it. Thank
Great.
you for your time.
Yeah, of course.
Ms. Cabrera? Naomi?
Oh, here I am. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My question, and sorry, I missed the earlier part, but in regards to professional development for teachers, when would they have the time for professional development?
Oh, thank you. On the two of the Fridays per month on average. So on this slide, you see the red Fridays. Those were the days that teachers would have 6 hours of professional learning on those days, and the blue days would be completely flexible for how they would use those. Certainly, they'd be at home or wherever they were.
And then my second question, in regards to like student learning, would there be a loss of hours in a school year for changing to this model?
So the number of hours would be relatively the same depending on exactly how many minutes we structured the school day. So I think if it was 7 hours and 30 minutes for 147 days, I think there was a difference of 35 hours, trying to recall properly. So it can be modeled at 0, or if people aren't as worried about the stamina of children and teachers, we could have a slightly longer day, 7 hours and 40 minutes, and we could get a lot closer to the number of instructional hours we have this school year.
My last comment is just on that. I would say that that's probably a high concern for parents, is the loss of time, because there is research out there for 4-day weeks that when you lose, hours over the school year, it does impact testing scores over the course of years.
Yeah, we share that same concern, and
Thank you.
you're well informed.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So one of the pros was teacher recruitment. Do we have any data on the impact of quality, of education quality going up in other districts or other states that you've modeled? I'm curious on that.
We were able to survey some of our other colleagues in other school districts. They did note that they had a much easier time recruiting in a 4-day week model. Now, if over time, multiple school districts and all of our surrounding school districts were to move to this, then I would assume that our advantage then is diminished. But initially, we would expect to see a definite advantage with that.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no other names in the chat. Dr. Schuff?
All righty. You want to put the slides back up? Great. All right. We recognize that moving from 5 days to 4 days is a major change for our school community, particularly for our parents, where we have working parents, which by and large, I'm sure it's probably most nearly or all. So the committee thought it was important for us to review what could the district do in terms of providing an alternative option for families. So I wanted to share some of that information. Currently, we have our LEAP program, and we offer that 5 days a week currently in the AM and PM. We start at 6:30 in the morning, we finish at 6:30 PM, and then that's subtracting, of course, whatever the children are in school in between that time. total of 27 hours per week, and we offer it for after-school early release on Wednesdays. Some of our families just take advantage of it on the early release day and don't take advantage of it on the other days. So trying to model something very similar to kind of a continuity of services, looked at a 4-day school week, or Monday through Thursday. It's a longer school day, so that would be less hours of service for the LEAP program. But on Friday, if we're going to offer 12 hours from 6:30 to 6:30, that then increases the total number of service hours to 30 hours in the week. Because we have to staff it according to staffing guidelines or staffing ratios per student to be licensed as a daycare provider, that required additional staffing that's brought up the costs from what they are currently this year. This program is a cash-controlled budget. That means that it's solely dependent for how it operates based on the revenue it brings in from the tuition paid by parents for those children to participate, and that has to be enough to cover the costs of essentially the staffing and small number of supplies. So when we look at this change, overall, no change in service hours or the sites Monday through Thursday, but the Friday impact, we believe we would need to narrow it to 2 school sites, one in the north, one in the south, for convenience of parents. We anticipate that it would require a fee increase, and that really is very dependent on the number of people who potentially would participate, to how you are spreading apart those costs. And at a certain point, you have to hire more staffing if the numbers get above certain thresholds, and then that could be a concern if there's a big demand for this. That could be then a concern for their ability to staff this, because we do struggle to maintain being fully staffed at this time. So overall, I think the positive of this is that we would be able to offer a program. We could certainly talk with parents and try to model the program maybe with a few less hours and maybe bring down the costs, or parents could say, no, the full service of the number of hours is what's most important to us. The cost, that small savings wouldn't be worth it to us, but we would feel like we would need to talk with families interested in this program for next year to finalize how we would model this program to best meet the needs of families. But again, we would be concerned about this from a standpoint of maybe making sure we're able to fully staff it, and we're concerned about the increased cost that could be too much of a burden for families. So any childcare discussion and questions? I will say that the idea came up last night in the hearing and also with committee, that it's possible that even though the school district wouldn't be responsible for the childcare, there could be potential for kind of cooperative agreements between families joining together and trading out daycare amongst themselves on Fridays. There's probably no end to the creativity, but we recognize that this would definitely is an important consideration. So we really would like to hear from families about what you think that impact would be to your family for the board to consider.
Mrs. Stewart?
Thank you. I just had a question. I realized that our kids go to Westar, so they feed obviously into Astoria Foothills, which is a completely different school district. Has there been talk among Buckeye School District to model after what Liberty is suggesting and go to the 4-day also?
I've had conversation with the superintendent, both Buckeye Elementary and Buckeye Union High School District, just really as a courtesy to let them know that this is being considered. And both of those school districts have indicated that they don't believe that they would be pursuing this at all. Particularly Buckeye Union High School District felt like this would be a very challenging model for a high school, probably largely because of the extensive extracurricular activities and athletic programs that they run. Those schools are open 7 days a week with all those activities.
Okay, thank you. The reason I ask is because our older child provides the childcare for our younger children. So it definitely impacts us to have him unavailable on that Friday.
Thank you for that perspective.
Jesse?
Yes, I just need to also state, I have 2 young daughters, and so this, it's twofold. The daycare situation it's going to be a severe issue for us and our home life, and not to mention, if this does go through, I will have no choice but to withdraw them, and they are just so nervous and upset about it already that it's even being discussed. They love school. They enjoy going to school Monday through Friday. They love going to the school that they go to now. And the thought of having to move, we couldn't even as parents explain it to them so they would even understand. They are just, why don't they want us there Monday through Friday? Why can't we just stay as we are going now? And why do they have to take a day away from us? And as kids, that's what they're thinking of, and that's how they feel. So this is kind of scary for me. The biggest issue, of course, I think we should focus on the kids, and the kids are wanting to be in school and enjoy their light fun days there, Monday through Friday, and taking away 1 day for them, I think is going to younger ones really kind of be upsetting to them. And as parents, it's a huge impact for daycare purposes for the younger kids, absolutely.
Thanks for sharing the child perspective.
Marcus?
Thank you. Obviously, it looks like the cost could significantly increase, and it could be a hardship on families. Is there, programs with the state of Arizona or Maricopa County where families can participate in vouchers for tuition to help offset the cost?
Yes, the Liberty District currently participates. It's kind of a tuition assistance based on economic need. And so we currently participate with that, and that does support those families that are eligible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mrs. Valencia?
Yes, I'm here. So I have perspective from both sides. I know there could be impacts to some parents and not to others. My children in the past were in another district, actually a charter school here in Buckeye that was a 4-day school week. So before that, we actually lived in Glendale. It was a 5-day, didn't have early release. So I've been through all these experiences through my kids the past few years. So going from the 5-day week to the 4-day, my kids loved it personally. They were in 2nd and 4th grade at the time. So I can say, kids are pretty resilient, and they did grow to like the 4-day work week or school week. So from that perspective, I can say, that they will get used to it fairly quickly. In my case, I know not all kids are the same, and then going back to the 5-day, most recently last year, they were kind of like, we got to be here 5 days. So I can definitely see it from both perspectives. But when we were in the school with the 4 days, as they mentioned earlier, through our Facebook group page that we had a lot of parents that, we set up groups of little cliques that might have been in the same kind of neighborhood, and they rotated on who could pick up the kids on this day, and they kind of built a little community family within the school, which I know the families are already pretty tight-knit over here. But it was a great way to bring everybody together a little bit closer. Me personally, I had my mom who was able to help at the time, and my sister. So I work in Chandler, still do. So I have to commute, hour both ways, each direction. So I do depend on my family and people to help me with going through school. Currently they ride the bus home, but I'm just sharing perspective. A lot of different things can happen in a positive way, hopefully not so much in a negative if that's the way we go. But I just like to share that, just coming from all the different sides of this as I've gone through different schools with my kids. So I can appreciate the 4 days just working. I do work 5 days, but on those days I want a Friday off. It comes in, nice that we could go on a trip without having to pull them out of school or go to the dentist or whatever it may be. I personally enjoyed the 4 days.
Thank you, Ms. Valencia.
Of course.
Mrs. Molina?
Yes, I wanted to know if there was any models with schools that went to the 4-day school week regarding how it affected their child care and the enrollment in the child care. Since, like there was another parent that said they're thinking of taking their kids out of the district. So I wanted to know if we had numbers on districts that moved to a 4-day school week, how many, children left, and how did that affect their child care and their programs?
Sure. The other school districts that I talked to that have in recent years moved to a 4-day week, Saddle Mountain, which is in Tonopah, pretty isolated, Apache Junction, Wickenburg, Casa Grande. So in those cases, there really weren't other even charter schools or other public school districts close by to give them options. So they really didn't see a decline in their enrollment. Cartwright did see a decline in enrollment, but it was also at a time when there were a number of charter schools that opened just recently. And that is rather typical, is when charter schools open, we do see a decline. So they didn't necessarily associate it with their change in 4-day week, but it very well could have impacted that. And they lost 1,200 students.
Oh, wow, that's significant. Okay, for
Yeah.
giving that example.
And that they're a much larger school district than we are.
Okay. But we're not Casa Grande, so a lot of families do have, options. So that's something to think about.
Yes, we definitely, we have districts that completely surround us, and there are charter schools nearby. So we are really not the same situation as most of those other districts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no other names, Dr. Schuff, if you continue.
So we talked about certified staff, and generally it was more positive than negative with certified staff. And then we looked at what would be the impact to support staff and how we define support staff. Those are the people, kind of the non-teachers of the staff that we employ. That would be people like the paraprofessionals in special education classrooms who provide assistance, our bus drivers, our food service workers, school secretaries, maintenance staff, and just looked at all of those employee groups to see what might be the impact on them with a 4-day week. So we started just with, in addition to the survey that we just offered generally out to all staff and then all parents last spring, Mr. Nuttall, our Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, he surveyed our two of our employee groups just to hear from them what might be the impact if their hours were reduced. So you can imagine you've got a 5-day week. If you reduced their hours by 20%, taking off one whole day a week, that potentially then is impacting, if you took that whole 20% off, then you are shortening the number of hours for which they are compensated, and then you are potentially impacting their ability to have benefits paid for by the district because they work too few hours with a shortened schedule. So here in these two charts, pretty readily shows that if they reduce the workday, the work hours, and would they continue to work? Their answer was pretty decidedly no. If the district provided benefits when they were working only 24 hours, you can see that a few more thought that would be positive, and they would said they would continue employment. So certainly their compensation and their benefits are two important things for consideration for our ability to recruit and retain our transportation staff. Then looking at food service, we provide the same survey, so I'll show you that in just a moment. Food service, there really weren't any pros that we could come up with here in talking with our food service manager and with the vendor who provides the services. Again, this is essentially cash controlled, so the revenue from the food is what enables them to buy the food and the quality or the variety of food, and then also that revenue allows them to pay for staff. So if the revenue goes down because we're not serving breakfast and lunch, pretty much you would need to decrease the staffing requirements also, so that result in a cut in hours for our food service. Most of the food service workers do not currently work enough hours for benefits, but the kitchen managers do. Overall, you'd see approximately a $40,000 shortfall in budget. That is after consideration of a potential increase of 15 cents per meal for breakfast and lunch, which is the maximum amount we are allowed to raise those meal prices. So, and then looking to see what did they think about their likelihood to continue working with the district. Again, in the red, no for those things without benefits and even with benefits. So some of the other things that Mr. Nuttall and their supervisors talked with employees about was, well, what if we were able to figure out a way to increase your hours during the week for everything except for LEAP and food service. We already have budget associated with it. So if they're able to perform some other duties for those hours and increase the hours Monday through Thursday, we potentially, that's one way to minimize the impact on support staff. Another way you could minimize the impact on support staff is take that budget savings and then apply that to maybe higher hourly rates, but you would have to do that across all employee groups to maintain fairness in the overall wage schedule throughout the district. So those are some ideas. When the committee looked at that in consideration, they were of the mind that if you were going to weigh out, would it be better to save as much money as possible, or is it better to try to preserve our support staff, retention and recruitment? Their overall thought was how to save and maintain the services provided by our staff and maintain the staff compensation as much as possible. So we felt like it was important to model potential budget impacts with those considerations, because if you philosophically wanted to save money, we need to look at something that's closer to Model 1. So think of Model 1 as essentially taking 1/5 of the hours, cutting that, and then taking what other savings that might come about in terms of, let's say, fuel costs or transportation, that sort of thing, or food costs for food services. Model 2 tries to minimize that impact to staff, but it still would be some reduction in hours. So maybe instead of reducing it by 6 hours per day, it might only get reduced by 4 hours per day, but it still would be a small reduction. Model 3 attempts to try to make it budget neutral for the employees and really truly minimizes any potential budget savings. So depending on what you think about it philosophically, we'll show you some examples coming forward. These were the employee groups we talked to. So I'll give an example of grounds and maintenance. That group of employees thought that they would prefer just to stay on a 5-day schedule. It's physical work. They could, utilize morning times when it's cooler, and they could get into the facilities and make repairs when students are out of the building. Our technology team particularly thought that could be beneficial to them because they often have to come in on weekends in order to access facilities when nobody's there. And then other people like school front office staff, there was, consideration to, when the doors are open, would the doors be open, offices open at all on Fridays, and you would need them on Fridays, or on the days that teachers were working for professional development, would we need some staff available? So really all these employee groups really had some potentially different variations of how this would be implemented. District office staff could, maybe by and large, most of them except for Edge Services, could go to 410s, Monday through Thursday, whereas the Ed Services team would need to model after what our teachers would be doing approximately every other Friday, working on professional learning. So we looked at it from every single employee group to say what would the hours be, what might be the impact to budget. So in these next slides, remember that Model 1 was trying to get the largest budget savings, and then what's most at risk then is your ability to recruit or retain our employees who provide those services. So therefore, at risk would be the ability to provide the service, consistent service with transportation. During the pandemic, we had a lot of non-bus drivers who were, credentialed, were driving our buses, and we somehow kept, we didn't turn off routes and say to parents, you're going to have to provide your own transportation for your child because we're not able to hire a bus driver. We were one of the few districts that wasn't in that position. There's school districts today that still are not providing route services to eligible riders. So what would be at risk, in Model 1 would be any of these staff members would be more difficult to recruit and retain. But you can also see, I'll flip to another one, you can also see that, that it also starts to offer a much bigger budget savings. So utilities, an example here, utilities being the same across the board, whether we tried to take a bigger savings with staffing doesn't really matter because the potential savings for utilities remains the same. Our custodial services, in Model 1, you could reduce 1 day of custodial services, cleaning the classrooms each day, but however, you need to know that right now we don't clean the classrooms every single day because of the expense of that. So there is some consideration that we probably shouldn't cut it 1 additional day beyond what it is already. And then look at overall, here's the transportation impact. The fuel supplies, there's a savings no matter what, depending on how you model the staffing or the hours for compensation, $75,000 regardless, versus staffing potentially savings $327,000 on staffing if you cut fully one day, versus reducing that impact reduces it only to a $63,000 savings. Food service, again, you see those changes there. Meal price increase, that starts to offset some of that decrease in funding. LEAP is pretty much a break-even model because it has to be structured in a break-even model. What we charge has to offset the costs, so we don't really anticipate much of a savings depending on which model we choose. We put all that together, Model 1 with the most drastic and taking advantage of as much budget savings as possible. That's an opportunity of $757,000 compared to, as close as possible to a break even, a savings of $130,000. And I think what's important to point out is that our district is currently phasing down the override. So we had to cut $850,000 this past year. If the override does not pass here in November, we are at risk then of having to cut an additional $1 million from the budget. So you can see that this could be an opportunity to offset some of that potential budget loss, but it's also a great risk of whether we'd be able to retain our staff and be able to continue some of those services that our families count on. Overall, the pros and cons, I'm not going to read them here. You can see them. They're fairly similar between the three models, other than certainly that budget savings and a recruitment retention aspect. So with that, one other aspect that one of our participants tonight brought up, if there is a decline in enrollment, a consequence of this potentially, we looked at this for modeling what's the budget impact of that enrollment loss. 1%, or 1 out of every 100 students enrolled, we lost 1% of our students. That's approximately $280,000 of loss. If it's 5, so just multiply that times whatever percent of loss of enrollment we could potentially anticipate. So you can see a bigger number at a potential 5%. Our surveys to parents have asked parents, overall, do they want to do this or do they not want to do this? We also asked them, are you very likely or somewhat likely to take your children to another school? And so if we took that percentage and applied it a straight model for budgetarily, that could have a very big impact on our budget. What we don't know is how many people say they will do something in a survey and how many actually do. We know that those are two different things, but we have to be very aware of what that impact is. And to the parents' point earlier, we don't want to lose children that are progressing well. We know those transitions, going to different schools, that's not good for children academically. That consistent enrollment is important, and our primary purpose is education. So there's a lot of factors here, both positive and negative. So with support staff and budget, let me just open it back up for discussion and questions.
So this would be the opportunity for the public to not only ask questions, but also looking at the models, what models you might prefer as a constituent or as a parent of the district. Naomi?
Hi, good evening again. Just some comments here on regards to support staff. Obviously, the whole state and neighboring districts are really feeling, recruiting and retention of our support staff. So I feel like the first model would really hamper the recruitment and the retention of our support staff. And without our support staff, we can't run our schools. And then additionally, you had said if we could comment on which model we prefer, and definitely not one is for sure, because I think that would impact our support staff the most. I saw that it wouldn't impact teachers or administrators. And I'm sure that if it did affect administrators, you'd also have a hard time in recruiting them.
Thank you.
Those are my comments. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Caitlin?
Hello, I was just wondering about our support staff that are currently paid through Title I funding. Would that be any change to them?
So it is a little more complicated, you're right. The funding source is title funds, and there is the potential to utilize, so an example, we have, let's say, a paraprofessional that works a 5-hour day. Our school day might be a 7.5-hour day. So we could take some of the hours on the Friday, move them to meaningfully to a Monday through Thursday, where they're still providing services directly to students during the school day, and we can mitigate, if you will, or offset some of that impact to the employee and still make sure we're maximizing the support we're providing to our children. So essentially, every single employee could potentially be an individual decision about how do we schedule their time to make the most usefulness of our budget and the time they have available to work, and try to also not have a harm to the employee.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Schroff?
So we're kind of reaching the end now where we're going to start to put all of this together. So if you go back and look, at the top of this list, maintaining our learning, our instructional learning, instructional hours, try to maintain as much as possible the professional learning for staff, trying to find a way to make things be more flexible and more autonomy and choice, and increasing the working conditions and work-life balance for our certified teachers, minimize those negative impacts to our support staff, make sure we have an option for some type of support for our families who need it on Fridays with childcare, and then certainly looking at, we wouldn't want this option proposing to cost more money. We feel like it needs to be neutral or have a cost savings. Stamina, what do our parents think? What's the impact to enrollment? So we would ask you, are there other things that the governing board should be thinking about to make the very best decision about whether or not to move forward with this? And then also, are there other just overall comments? Overall, we'd like to hear from you to say, what would you recommend? Yes to do it, not to do it, and why? So we'll open it back up again.
Jesse?
Yes, thank you. I just have to say, coming off the pandemic, I felt like my children were just beginning school, kindergarten, first grade, and for a kindergarten just to stop in the middle of the school year because of a pandemic and try to do online school, she fell behind, as well as the one that was in first grade. So we've kind of just gotten done with conferences, and they're right on track, and they're doing well. They're doing really good, and they're thriving. And I just want them to hold on to some consistency and not have things change on them again. So their personal well-being is my number one concern. I get it, the bigger picture, there's budget, there's, obviously we all care for our teachers and the educational staff, the support staff as a whole. I just have to fight for my kids. So for me, it's I would love for it just to stay the same, and as well as it's going to be an issue for us financially as a family looking into daycare for that extra day in the week. I would prefer as the mother for them to have an educational base, Monday through Friday, leave the weekends for us. We do the homework at night, but it's hard for me to hear as a parent, we're gonna shorten the education to 4 days, and if you want, get to know someone in the school district and leave your kid with them on one full day during the week. That to me, that's just not an easy pill for me to swallow, when before they were going to school, and then now I have to just link up with someone and drop them off with a group of kids to play for a whole day. I would prefer that they were in school having and learning. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So Andrew has a comment, and I'll read it out loud. It says, he doesn't have a mic, so it says, if school board insists on making this dramatic change, can we experiment with just one of the schools instead of all of them? This will be a very disruptive experiment. Would it not be safer to experiment with one school and more gradually roll out? In addition, let's experiment with a school that goes for 5 full days instead of a half day every week. Thank you for that, Andrew. Is there any other questions or comments from the public? Sarah?
Have you taken into consideration, like coming off of COVID, when decreasing the hours of education, like the current benchmark statuses of most of our students? Because like coming off of parent-teacher conferences last week and talking with some of the teachers, there are still a lot of students that are so far behind. And I feel as though if you're going to take away 32 hours a year of education, that's gonna just keep those students that are behind still currently behind. So I'm just curious if you guys have actually like dug into the benchmarks of where the students currently are, and if this is going to impact them or be helpful to them or hurt them in any way.
You bring up a valid point. So yes, the instruction hours, access to education, a lot of the research coming out of and recommendations for educating post-pandemic or during the pandemic. One of the biggest things they say is do what you can to increase instructional hours to be able to overcome that deficit. So, you know, your point is well taken.
I guess at this time I'd like to ask, do any of the board members have any questions? Mr. Parks, Ms. Bixler, Mr. Parks?
Real quick, how do you think this is going to affect, from what we were talking about yesterday, it appears that the higher absences for both teachers and students are on Friday. I was kind of coming up with some quick math and working this out. Do you believe this would be a net benefit or a negative? I mean, would we see more kids attending more hours during the 4 days as opposed to losing them significantly on the Friday like we currently do?
I think generally the what we found in the literature was that attendance improved for students, in terms of the percentage of days that they were in school. So I can only assume that that was for, people who were traveling on weekends anyway. They didn't care that school was in session. They took their children out, or if there were medical absences or planned appointments. So I would say that perhaps that's a benefit of potential for increased student attendance.
Thank you.
I have no question.
Mr. Jensen? Mr. Todd?
Mr. Chairman, I was curious with Cartwright, we've talked 1,200 students, but they have several thousand in that district. Do we know what percentage that is of students that left?
I don't know what their total enrollment is to help you with that.
I mean, that may be less than 1% at that. I mean, they're large. How many schools?
If I was guessing, I'd say there are around 35,000 students.
Okay, so they're compared, yeah. Okay, the only other thing, I made this comment last night, and I'll just make it again. First of all, thank you everybody for participating, and the feedback is great. This is certainly probably going to be a very tough decision, but I do look at, we've identified that lots of students are missing on Friday already, so we may potentially gain time in the classroom by having them school Monday through Thursday, and then when they would be absent on Friday, there would already be no school. So I think we need to dig in that a little bit more and look at how many true absences we have on Friday and where we go from there. But other than that, I appreciate everybody's time.
And I'd also like to thank the public for participating. Adding different perspectives to the board, to administration, definitely helps in a very already difficult decision that we are going to have to make. Some different perspectives that were brought up at a meeting last night at Blue Horizons was there was a lot of talk about mental health for teachers and staff, of being able to have that Friday to finish up any work that needed to be done, any preparations, things of that nature, continuing education, and so on. And what was pointed out is that, and this was actually by teachers, is that would leave teachers and staff and administration Saturdays and Sundays to be able to really truly spend with their children and their families. So that was an interesting perspective that I don't know that we always look at. But also with that, they brought up, also teachers and staff also brought up, is that on Fridays for that professional development day, that it's a full day for them to get better, right? For the continuing education, to get their lessons plans more in line and have more time to prepare those things. So I hear what the public's saying of losing possible 32 hours of instructional times, but I also wonder if we have staff and teachers that are better prepared to deliver that lesson plan for that week, what do we gain? And I just that was a very interesting perspective when that was brought up. But again, on behalf of the board, really appreciate everyone participating. We hope that there was added different perspectives that maybe kind of gave some folks pause of whether you were for this or against this. Because I think for the board and administration, there's always very valid points that kind of gives us pause and makes us rethink some things of seeing if we can maybe bridge that gap of making something work for the betterment of the students, the staff, and also the community as a whole. So thank you for that. I'd like to encourage you all. Was there one more? Was there one more?
Sorry.
Okay. Marcus?
Thank you. I commented at the very end, so thank you for taking my comment. I would just say that I am someone that came into this very much for this going to a 4-day schedule. I think it's beneficial all the way around for a lot of things that people have already mentioned. But I did appreciate the perspectives on some families on the hardship, and I didn't realize that. So I know it's going to be a tough decision all the way around, and it's not going, not everyone's going to be happy. So I appreciate the decision that's going to be forthcoming. I guess my also concern is around budgeting with the override vote coming in November, how that will greater impact on this decision moving forward. And so I know that that's got to be a consideration. So my hats off to the board and their tough work ahead, but I really hope that this continues to get strong consideration, because I think the benefits outweigh some of the issues, and I hope that we can find some good resolution. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So are we going to roll right into the regular board meeting with this same link?
No.
It's a different link?
The live stream is still continuing, and this public hearing, the Google Meet will finish.
Okay.
And we'll just continue with our regular board meeting the way we normally do.
Okay. So I'd like to encourage everyone on the call, if you can, to go to the live stream. We're going to go ahead and look at adjourning the virtual public meeting, and we're going to roll. We'll probably take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll roll right into our regular governing board meeting. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the virtual public meeting.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the virtual public meeting.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second to adjourn altogether. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Show that we adjourned at 6:50. Is 5 minutes okay for everyone? Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the regular governing board meeting to order, being held here at Jerry Rovey District Facility. The time is 6:54. Mr. Todd had a previous engagement Rest of the governing board members are all still present, and we'll forego the Pledge of Allegiance as we've done it already this evening. It is recommended the governing board approve the regular agenda consistent with board policy BEDB and temporarily suspend governing board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the regular agenda consistent with board policy BEDB and temporarily suspend governing board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye, so that it approved unanimously. Item 4.1, Visual and Performing Arts Administrative Report.
Good evening, Mr. President, governing board members. I have the pleasure tonight of presenting our visual and performing arts presentation. If you recall last year, we reported specifically on physical education and how physical education built the body and the brain, and the PE teacher from Freedom also demonstrated the integration of technology into physical education with the use of heart rate monitors. So tonight, I'm going to emphasize music and art. In our district, one of our core beliefs and our board policy states that we believe in educating the whole child with a well-rounded education in order to meet our vision of cultivating curious, confident problem solvers prepared for tomorrow. We know that the benefits of music, physical education, and art are many, and here are just a few specifically talking about music and art. We know that music, schools with music and band have higher attendance rates. We also know that children who study music have a larger vocabulary and are more self-confident, and students that study music also have an increased score in math and English on achievement tests. In art, we know that art in school strengthens problem solving and critical thinking, and it also improves academic performance, creativity, and social development. We have an amazing staff of music and art teachers, as well as physical education teachers in our Champs area. For each of our schools, this slide just displays how many FTE we have per campus on each of our school sites. We have a total of 21.1 FTE for our campuses so that our children have access to all subject areas. Our subjects also, particularly in the visual and performing arts, have their own state standards and daily lesson plans tied to those performing standards. These are the cluster standards of creating, performing, presenting, and producing, responding, and connecting. What might those look like in practice? So I asked one of our amazing art teachers from Liberty Elementary School, Miss Bethany Heiss, to give me just a quick synopsis of a self-portrait color unit. And in this color unit, she's listing the performance standards of the visual arts, and then going back to that cluster standard, if you will, of creating. You'll see the CR. And her overall performance objective was that students would use their knowledge of color groups to add a desired effect in a work of art. What might that look like? These amazing self-portraits that were created by our students at Liberty Elementary School. When I saw them on display, I actually said to myself, if I were a parent, I'd want to frame them. You know, this is something you would want to keep for your child for years to come. And then show at their wedding, of course, because that would be embarrassing, right? And here is a progression of our music classrooms. So in many of our music classrooms, our music teachers work together to establish learning targets for our students to be able to do specific things in music on a daily basis. And this is just a snapshot that I was able to take of learning targets at the kindergarten level, the 4th grade level, and then also the 8th grade level. You can see those learning targets are increasing in complexity by grade as our students fulfill their music requirements in each of those grades. I think the most important thing is seeing students in action. And so many of you have been able to see our students performing, whether it be at a Champs Night with beat and rhythm. This would be at Estrella Elementary School. Or in the classroom where children are focusing on reading notes and identifying whether it's a whole note or a half note or a quarter note. Or celebrating in front of their parents and singing patriotic songs. This is 5th grade. I think, again, at Estrella, the amazing art designs that Miss McAvoy is able to portray in her art classes with many students. And here's 2nd grade. This is at Las Brisas Academy, where parents and students collaboratively were designing artwork together, where they believe that together we are better. I am so proud of our visual and performing arts that we are able to provide for each and every one of our students within the Liberty Elementary School District, and I'll take any questions.
Mr. Parks?
I have more of a comment. We can look at the academic side, and we can look at all the benefits kind of surrounding the school day. I'll tell you this, it's a lot easier to get my son out of bed on days he's got art and music. He loves it, and he gets it. He's the first one up. So, there's nothing wrong with having fun at school, and I think art and music is definitely a key to making sure our kids get up and get to school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bixler?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the art and music are the heart of the schools. Yes, we're there to teach math, we're there to teach language arts and so on, but really the heart of the school is in the music and the art. So it broke my heart when we had to make some reductions to that this year, and it even fears me more that we'll do it again next year. So I appreciate that. I would like for us to go back to slide number 6, if you would. I'm sorry, number 5. Slide 5.
You're going to have to tell me what's on that slide. Oh, thank
Yeah, the
you.
standards
Thank
right
you,
there.
Thank you.
And I want people just to read the verb involved with those standards. Look at what they are. They're create, generate, and analyze. This is all higher level thinking skills. This is not solve a problem, give me an answer. This is real creative thinking, and this is what we should be doing in education. So I agree. I'm very much in support of the art and music programs here.
Mr. Jensen?
Just to ditto what everybody else has said, it's great to have these great classes and all the teachers and the work that they put in there, and it's so fun to go around and see all the art and everything on display at each of the campuses.
Yeah, I just appreciate administration putting this together so that the public can see what is possibly at stake. I don't think that it gets enough media attention, if you will. It's not the wow factor of testing and whatnot of music, right? Drawing, performing. These are all things that in society start at the elementary level. And I think these are all things that get taken for granted until we're at a moment where we're at. I can only tell you for my own experience that my little one, when attending kindergarten that one of the things that the kindergarten teachers at Rainbow Valley used was song, jingles, to teach the kids ABCs, objects that were associated with the letters. It was unbelievable how quickly we pick up on things that are associated with the arts and the things that can be learned. And I can't express how important it is that we're able to keep these programs, because it's so vitally important to educate the whole child, not just math, science, social studies, and so on. The whole child, to create that abstract thinking. That's the future of our leaders. So, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Item 4.2, teacher resignations submitted to the State Board of Education.
Mr. President, members of the board, first of all, that's a tough presentation to follow with this item on the agenda, so I apologize. Last month, the governing board requested that district administration provide a number of teachers who had resigned who were reported to the Arizona Department of Education for unprofessional conduct, as well as if there's been any dispositions as a result of those reports. And so over the last year, I have made the decision to report to ADE 4 employees, former employees that the governing board has approved their resignations, to report to the state for unprofessional conduct. To date, I've not received any information from ADE specific to any dispositions based off of what I've reported. I have one that I've have reached out to me specific for some more information. But other than that, there have been 0 dispositions made. I think it's well known that the state investigations unit specific to ADE has a hierarchy and a prioritization of how they go about their investigations, and resignations of unprofessional conduct are at the very lowest component of that, unfortunately. So that's the information that I have to provide for you tonight.
Questions? Okay. Hearing none. Item 5.1, governing board updates. Mr. Parks?
I don't have anything at this time.
Ms. Bixler?
No, neither do I. I have nothing to report.
Mr. Jensen?
Nothing.
Thank you. Item 6.1, calls to the public. Consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like pulled?
No.
Okay. Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul? Aye. I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. General business, item 8.1, discussion and consideration to approve Dr. Edward Sloat as Director of Research.
Mr. President, governing board members, this evening administration is very pleased to recommend Dr. Edward Sloat for the Director of Research position. I've attached his resume if you like a really good read and lengthy read. His resume is very robust, and we are honored to recommend him for the Director of Research position this evening. As noted in the executive summary, this position is grant funded from Project Momentum, and we are honored to welcome him aboard pending your approval this evening.
What a resume.
Very amazing. We are so lucky to have you here. It is, I was blown away. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you.
Hearing none,
As are we.
I'd entertain a motion to approve item 8.1.
Mr. President, I move that we approve Dr. Edward Sloat as Director of Research.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that it approved unanimously. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from you. Item 8.2, discussion and consideration to approve signature program stipends for Freedom Elementary.
Governing board members, Mr. President, as you're aware, Freedom Elementary's signature program is in the area of communications. And in discussion with Principal Reynolds, she is trying to promote in the very best way possible her signature program. So tonight, I'm bringing forward some stipends with pay structures that are already approved for all of our extracurriculars. These are just specialized for the signature program that the discretionary funds of the principal has the opportunity to use. And so I'd like to just quickly summarize those in relation to the communications component as well as the stipend amount. So they're putting together a morning news and talk show sponsor. We have a communications director who's assisted in a lot of those things and been involved very heavily. And so they're looking to promote that for the stipend of $2,500 annually. In addition, debate club sponsor for $1,800, and something I can't wait to be a part of and watch is the Poetry Slam sponsor for $1,800. So it's progressing in a wonderful way for Freedom Elementary and the communications, and we bring forward these stipends for you to this evening.
Questions? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 8.2.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the item 8.2, the signature program stipends for Freedom Elementary.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that it approved unanimously. Item 8.3, discussion and consideration to approve fiscal year 2021-2022 annual financial report. The maiden voyage. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Need that. Okay. So good evening, Mr. President and governing board members. I'm happy to share with you a brief summary of the fiscal year 22 annual financial report. I guess maybe I should change the slide. Which one? Up?
I used up all the batteries.
That one, the opposite one. Okay, thank you. Okay. So Arizona Revised Statute requires school districts to prepare and submit an annual financial report annually by October 15th of each year. The Auditor General, in conjunction with the Arizona Department of Education, is required to prescribe the AFR format to be used by all school districts and to incorporate the information districts are statutorily required to include in the AFR. Included in your packets was a copy of the completed AFR, which included the AFR report and summary of the food service AFR. The purpose of the report is to provide information on annual revenues and expenditures. The district's accounting records as maintained by the county for all revenues, expenditures, and fund balances were utilized as source documentation for the preparation of this report. The report contains information related to budgeted and actual expenditures. The report must be submitted to the Arizona Department of Education, and we must publish the report by November 15th and also post a link on the district's website to the file upload section on ADE's website. This slide represents a summary of the district funds. This information can also be found on the summary sheet of the annual financial report. The first column is the funding description. The second column is available funding, which is representative of the total of budget balance carry forward and current year revenues. The third column is the total expenditures for the year, And the last column is the ending fund balance, which is the available funding less expenditures through August 31st. The first two lines, M&O and capital outlay, are representative of where most day-to-day activities occur. The federal projects line includes federal grants, E-rate, and Medicaid, and the state projects line includes results-based funding. The next 5 lines, adjacent ways, bond building, building renewal grant, emergency deficiencies, and new school facilities, are related to capital spending. Community school is the extended day program. Food service has a significant fund balance, primarily due to the free meals offered during fiscal year 22. Since we are only able to carry 3 months of available funds, a use of funds plan has been submitted to ADE Child Nutrition and will be expended in fiscal year 23. Finally, all other funds include funds such as auxiliary operations, civic center, tax credit, unemployment, student activities, and indirect costs. As you can see, the total of all budget balance carry forward and revenues was just under $74 million. Total expenditures for the year was approximately $68 million, with an overall balance of approximately $13 million. This next slide is a breakdown of the sources of revenues and expenditures or uses. This ending balance is not inclusive of the $1,886 from the revolving fund account. I had to bring it to almost to the penny. Of the total revenues received, the largest portion comes from the state revenues, with the next largest portion being property tax. Of the total expenditures, the largest portion is salaries and benefits. These total 65% of the overall district budget and close to 80% of the maintenance and operations budget. The overall fund balance increased by just under $29,000. This increase is primarily a result of bond funding received. This chart is to further illustrate the revenues by category, as well as compares the revenues from fiscal year 21 to 22. The biggest difference to note is the increased state funds from student growth, new school facilities funds, and the receipt of bond proceeds. This chart is to further illustrate the expenditures by category. Salaries and benefits are where the majority of spending occurs. They are still a larger percentage, however, there were increased costs for school construction over the past 2 years with bond spending and construction of the Liberty Rebuild Project and Blue Horizons. And this slide is representative of the other fiscal activity that occurs. We had approximately 92,000 fiscal year transactions. We vouchered for approximately 3,100 warrants or checks. Sorry. There we go. There's the data. So I'll start again. We had approximately 92,000 fiscal year transactions. We vouchered for approximately 3,100 warrants or checks. We issued about 1,500 purchase orders, and the story continues. I don't need to read all that information to you. In conclusion, I would like to recognize the business and personnel office staff for all of their hard work throughout the year. They are the faces behind the scenes who work diligently to provide support and make sure operations are successful. This list also includes Ms. Kelly Basinger. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions you might have.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, thank you so much for the report. Had a couple of questions. If we go back to slide number 4.
There, I got it. Which is?
That one.
This one?
That one right there. Oop, sorry, go back one more.
One more.
That one.
Okay.
I noticed there's a couple of those that are in parentheses.
Yes.
What does that mean?
A deficit balance. So for building renewal grant, we expended the money and anticipating that in the fiscal year 23. The other one is for new school facilities. That money is forthcoming to us when we purchase begin construction on the new buildings.
So our anticipation is that those parentheses items will no longer be in parentheses after 23?
Correct.
Okay. If we can go to the first slide on the pie chart you have with the breakdown. Right. It appears that as far as revenue sources, we're starting to depend a lot more on the state. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Is that probably because of the loss of the override? That we have less local funding?
I cannot answer that for you at at this time, but I will check into that and get back to you.
Okay, that'd be great. And then if we go to the next slide, I'm guessing the same thing because of the changes we have made for this school year, that the amount of monies that we have going towards salaries has actually dropped percentage-wise because we just have left people to pay a salary to. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes.
Thank you.
22 shows a higher percentage going to salaries than the prior year, which would be reflective of of increased number of staff members because of an increase in student enrollment.
And you're right, that's the way I should have asked that question, so you're right. Thank you.
Mr. Jensen?
No, just the other thing of the bond building, we spent less in 22 than 21, so that throws that percentage off.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I would add is, you look at the final slide, just kudos to the staff. Our enrollment and our staffing has significantly increased, and therefore the volume that has gone through the business department with no change to the level of staffing. The staff also has turned over. We had a lot of retirements. That has also, occurred in just recent months. So really kudos to all of them and the new team. So thank you, Beth.
So I have a question. What does it mean when it says fund balance of 11.1 million to year-end balance of 13 million? Does that mean that we have 13 million left over after all the bills are paid? That was on slide 5. I think it's one after that one.
So this has a total fund balance. It shows a little more than $13,000. That's including all of those funds.
13 million?
Mm-hmm. That's all of those funds. That's the big chunk of the 10 million for school facilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily mean that we have
Building
13
fund.
million to spend.
Correct.
What does that mean exactly? Like, could you explain it? Because I think there might be a misunderstanding out in the public that the school district has a tremendous amount of extra money that we can just spend.
So you will see the biggest chunk of that is the 12 million in the bond building. And those are the bonds that were sold, I believe, last year about this point in time. And so we have yet to spend those bond buildings for construction that's coming up.
So realistically,
if you will look at,
if we take away the 12 million, we could say that money's already spent.
Correct. Yes, what you have basically to use is your M&O fund with the first two lines, M&O fund and your capital outlay.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, like I said, because I think there's sometimes confusion out in the public that when they see these great big numbers, I don't think the public quite understands that this money it's already earmarked, it's already spent. We're just waiting to actually send that money to the contractor, if you will, or for building as you stated.
Correct. Move forward with our projects.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Add to that, it's a lot of that's in a carryover too into the next year until we get funding.
Yes.
So that's also how that works.
So, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So with that, I'd entertain a motion, if there's no other discussion on this item, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 8.3.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2021-2022 school level report. Is it 8.3 or 8? Did I miss one? I think I missed it.
Annual financial report.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2021-2022 annual financial report as presented.
I'll second.
So a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously.
Getting ahead of myself.
Item 8.4, discussion consideration to approve fiscal year 2021-2022 school level report.
It's me again. All right. I'm not shaking quite so bad this time, so we'll be a little bit better. Mr. President, members of the Governing Board, this presentation will provide an overview of the school level reporting for fiscal year 22. Legislation put into place annual school level reporting requirements. The law requires the information listed on the slide to be reported. The information essentially requires that revenues and expenses to be reported at the school level. The overall intent is to provide a more transparent report. The information is to be reported at the same time as the annual financial report in order to get a full understanding of how the financial data ties to the school level. The school listing includes all district schools using the accounting data extrapolated from the annual financial report broken down to the school level. The report includes a comparison by school and is not a canned or flat report. Rather, it gives the opportunity to compare school data side by side. Later in the presentation will be a few examples of what the report will provide. There is a single school report that was included in the board packets. The single schools report is a breakdown of information by school from the data provided on page 9 of the annual financial report. And the totals report is a flat file of all the compilation of data. Flat line, that's probably me. This slide here will show you all of the district schools for fiscal year 22 along with their unweighted ADM. Included in the packet was a total report listing each school and their associated data. That report was 35 pages in length. There's a lot of data included in the reports. It includes revenues, funding for both regular education and special education, expenses for individual schools grouped in various configurations, such as certified salaries, classroom site fund expenditures, and side-by-side comparisons between schools. It also includes some expense and revenue for district level that is not broken out by school, such as the bond funding. This slide captures a section of the report that includes expenses for funds 0 to 799, excluding Fund 575, which is unemployment costs. The last column provides the amount per pupil. Information you might extrapolate from this slide is the higher per pupil amount for Blue Horizons. This is due to startup costs for the new school. Over the next couple of slides, we highlighted some examples of comparisons. Again, I would reiterate that there's a lot of data in the report, which will be summarized in the annual school report cards. In this slide, we show the side-by-side comparisons of salary and benefits by program for Liberty, Rainbow Valley, and Freedom Elementary Schools. There is overall consistency in teacher salaries and proportionate per pupil spending based on ADM. All three of these campuses have some self-contained special education classrooms and overall are similar, but due to the enrollment, have varied amounts per pupil. This side-by-side comparison of salary and benefits by program is for Las Brisas and Blue Horizons, the most recent Title I schools. You may note a higher per pupil amount at Blue Horizons. This is due to longer tenured teachers being hired at Blue Horizons and shared with Liberty School. This slide shows Estrella Mountain and Westar. As you can see, Westar Elementary has a higher special education per pupil cost as compared to Estrella Mountain. Westar Elementary has multiple self-contained special education classrooms that proportionately increase their per pupil spending. The next three slides represent classroom site fund comparisons. This particular slide is for Liberty, Rainbow Valley, and Freedom. Because all schools are eligible for these funds, funding is derived strictly by ADM. This past year, the full eligible payout was $9,000 per teacher. This slide is a comparison between Las Brisas and Blue Horizons. And this slide is a comparison between Estrella Mountain and Westar. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, Brian? Speak, sir.
No, I just had my question was why Blue Horizons had a much higher per pupil cost, but yeah, you explained it. More experienced teachers. Interesting. I didn't realize it had that big an impact. That's an interesting number to look at. You're right. 35 pages was a lot to look through. How much time did this take you guys?
A good 2 weeks. Yeah.
It seems intense.
Yeah, you extract the data and then you put it in one file format and then you have to move it all over to all these other different places
Well, thank you for doing it. It's very complete.
every year.
Mr. Jensen?
Have you been able to gain any insights from doing all this and breaking it down? I mean, you kind of showed some of those differences, but are there other valuable insights that we can have on how we would adjust our operations of the district?
Because there's many different categories, you have to take specific items and look at those and track those across all 7 schools. So you could do specifically for special education and look at all 7 schools. You could do regular education. I'm not quite sure if it includes operations, like transportation or something like that. There is a category for transportation, but that's at the district level. So I do believe these reports eventually will be up on that dashboard that Mr. Todd had been referenced a few meetings ago, and which allows the public and board members to go out and compare our schools with other schools.
If we could just include in one of the weekly updates or whatever, whenever that comes out, send us the link so we can get on and look at it. That'd be great.
And does this report get filed
Yes.
with an agency?
No, it gets filed with the Arizona Department of Education.
Okay.
It's uploaded at the same time the annual financial report is uploaded.
And is this audited?
So you're maybe thinking that the Auditor General takes our information from this annual financial report, similar to all other school districts, public school districts, and utilizes that information to make comparisons between school districts and how essentially how efficiently they're operating.
So there's multiple eyes that look at this,
Yes.
other than the school district itself, outside entities. Interesting.
Internal and external auditors.
Yep. Thank you so much.
I do have one final question. I'm sorry, Mr. President. The Gift and Talent program over at Westar has a component that is a self-contained. Is that reflected in the numbers there as far as the funding through special ed?
Yes.
So that would be considered a special program?
Yes.
A self-contained special program?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's no other discussion or questions. I'd entertain a motion to approve item 8.4.
I'll make a motion to approve item 8.4 for the fiscal year 2021-22 school level report.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that it approved unanimously. Item 8.5, discussion and consideration to approve fiscal year 2021-2022 classroom site fund expenditures and narrative report.
Hello again.
Third time's a charm.
This presentation is to provide a summary of the fiscal year 22 classroom site fund narrative report. As required by Arizona Revised Statute, districts must provide a summary of results achieved through programs funded with classroom site fund monies. This summary information is used by the Office of the Arizona Auditor General to annually report district-specific and statewide Prop 301 results. 2 important items to consider when looking at the classroom site fund information. First, funding is based on prior year student count versus our regular budget, which is based on current year student count. And second, the allocation for fiscal year 22 includes a one-time increase of $192 per weighted student count for accumulated cash balances due to a higher than budgeted sales tax revenues during the pandemic. The overall allocation is based on $733 per weighted student count. 20% of the allocation is to be distributed as base pay. 40% of the allocation is to be distributed as performance pay, and the remaining 40% is described as menu monies and can be used for a number of things, including teacher compensation increases, class size reduction, Ames intervention, teacher development, and dropout prevention. As part of the requirements for the classroom site funds, performance pay goals must be established. This slide represents the goals established, whether at the district level, school level, or individual level. The district must report the number of goals established and the number of goals achieved. The report in your packets includes a listing of those goals and the results. The district pays 100% of classroom site funds for teacher compensation and performance pay. The typical annual amount teachers receive is approximately $7,000. Again, the total amount paid to eligible teachers was $9,000 due to the one-time increase for fiscal year '22. The amount was paid in 3 lump sum payments, one in December, one in June, and the final payment in August of this current fiscal year. This slide represents the expenses reported in the annual financial report and the classroom site fund narrative report. We paid out just over $2.4 million in salaries and benefits. Happy to entertain any questions.
Mr. Parks? Ms.
I
Bixler?
don't have any questions, though, but you've done a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, the site fund continues. You had mentioned that the additional amount that we received was a one-time, is that correct?
Correct.
So we can't expect that for this year, but then the site fund does continue. So we do still have that money available as far as teacher performance and such, right?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Jensen? So the site fund, the district seems to continue to use all of this going directly to teacher, 100%. All monies. 100% goes to teacher compensation, correct?
Correct.
And I think that the district actually has an option that they don't necessarily have to do that, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Correct. Ms. Strickland did speak to the other options, so we could use it for funding to pay for an additional teacher to reduce class sizes. We could use it to offset costs for professional development, do some other kinds of things. Those are all allowable by law. This district has a long history of making sure 100% of all those dollars went towards supportive of teacher compensation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to the folks who are live streaming or watching this, that this school district has a very long history of this 301 money that was intended for additional teacher compensation. 100% of it goes to teacher compensation, and I'd like to thank Mr. Jensen, when I came on board, that was the way things were when I came on board, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 8.5.
I'll make a motion to approve 8.5, the 2021-2022 Classroom Site Fund Expenditure and Narrative Report.
Second.
Do I have a motion and a second? All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 9.1, board comments or agenda topics. Does anyone have anything?
I do, Mr. President. I'd like to get some more information on our legal insurance pool. I have some questions on actually how that's funded and expenditures are handled, and I sent Dr. Schuff the bullet points on what I'm asking for.
Is there support for that? Yeah. Okay. You got that one?
I have that one.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, Michael Todd was unfortunately unable to stay for the entire evening, but he had asked me to make a request to the board. Apparently, the Arizona School Board Association has put out a boilerplate on a resolution requesting the governor of the state to call a special session for specific for the funding of public education. And I'm not sure what the timing is on this, but it may be something that we would need to have maybe a special meeting to get it done in time, since our next board meeting is a bit of a ways off. So the request was that we do a special meeting to endorse the resolution that ASBA has put out.
So that was actually one that I was going to ask for, and no, we do not need to have a special meeting then. We have time.
Okay. So then it would be that as an agenda item.
Okay. Dr. Strouf, get that? The next. Yep. Anyone else? Mr. Jensen? Nope. Okay. Upcoming board meetings? Everyone still good for the 24th? Okay.
And tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We have one more, yes, at Rainbow Valley tomorrow evening, 5:30. And then we've got the 14th and 28th of November, so. Okay, so with that, moves us to item 11.1.
Mr. President, I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All together, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, show that we adjourned at 7:40.